He preyed on the lost and the vulnerable.
What was going through my mind at that time was, what have we got here? Because I'd never seen anything like this before.
He murdered 15 men without the police realizing a killer was at large. He attacked without reason.
He tried to drown me, and apparently he brought me back to life.
His brutality shocked even the most hardened of investigators.
There was an evil smell as well as an evil feel to the whole thing.
Who was the most macabre serial killer to prowl the streets of London? Muswell Hill, a quiet suburb in North London. One of the longest roads in the area is Cranley Gardens. Over halfway along is number 23. A mock Tudor-style house that's been split into 6 small bed-sits. The residents of number 23 are having problems with their plumbing, blocked pipes, and disgusting smells emanating from the drains. An engineer makes a visit to deal with the problem. Initially, there appears to be no obvious cause for the blockage. Then, something catches the engineer's eye.
I found something!
Caught in the drain are strange-looking lumps of meat and bone. They're like nothing the engineer has ever seen before.
What is that?
Highly suspicious of what they've discovered, the engineers call the police. News of their strange findings soon makes its way to Detective Chief Inspector Peter Jay.
There's a day in my life that I'll never forget. I had a phone call from the early turn duty officer, a uniform inspector, and he asked me if I would come up to 23 Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill because he'd found something in some drains that he didn't like the look of.
Arriving at the scene, Jay is shown the lumps of meat and bone. Almost immediately, he fears the worst.
When I looked closely at these remains, I had a funny feeling that they were human because the bones were about 3 inches long, 2.5, 3 inches long, and they had a knuckle at each end, and it looked very much like they'd come from a human hand.
To try and find out for certain, Jay rushes the bones and flesh to forensic pathologist, Professor David Bowen.
The bones were clearly those from the hand. Small bones and a bigger bone from the wrist area. So it was quite clear from Mr. Jay's findings to me that there was the body of or parts of a body of a human being.
With the remains confirmed as human, Peter Jay's mind immediately fills with horrific possibilities.
So I thought, well, somebody's been murdered, and bits and pieces of him have been flushed down the toilet. And then all sorts of possibilities crop up in your mind. What else has happened? Where are the bones? Where's the rest of the body? Where's the head?
The race is now on to find the rest of the body. The first clue comes when the police examine the building's plumbing system.
The blockage went halfway up the drains, halfway up the side of the house. No one was living on the middle floor, so it had to be coming from the top floor.
The top floor flat is rented to 37-year-old Dennis Nilsen, an executive officer at a nearby job centre.
So it was a question of going straight back to 23 Cranley Gardens, and I waited inside the hallway with Steve McCusker, my deputy, in order that we could be there when the occupant of the top flat came home from work.
Mr. Nilsen. Dennis Nilsen?
Yes?
I'm Detective Chief Inspector Peter Jay. I've come about your drains.
I didn't know the police were interested in plumbing. These two health inspectors?
No. We are here because we found something in your drains. We think you can tell us where it came from. So, if you let us into your flat, we'll tell you all about it.
Okay, follow me.
Nothing could ever prepare Peter J. for the horrific secrets hidden behind Nilsen's door. A routine inspection of a blocked drain proves to be anything but routine when the obstruction is discovered to be human tissue. The only place the remains could have come from is the attic flat of 23 Cranley Gardens, whose sole resident is 37-year-old Dennis Nilsen.
Mr. Nilsen, I've come about your drains.
Waiting to meet Nilsen upon his return from work is Detective Chief Inspector Peter J.
So, if you let us into your flat, we'll tell you all about it.
Little does Jay realize the terrible Pandora's box he is about to open.
Yeah, Nilsen's flat was a very, very top one. The three windows together. The first thing that struck us when we walked in through that door was the incredible smell, the smell of decomposing flesh. Something that you would never fail to identify if you knew what it was. The whole thing was just strange. There was an evil smell as well as an evil feel to the whole thing.
Jay decides to adopt the direct approach.
My first words to Nilsen when we got in the flat was, the drains were blocked with human remains. And he said,
Oh my God, how awful.
Nilsen's strangely calm manner worries Jay.
What was going through my mind at that time was what on earth has been going through the mind of Dennis Nilsen here? What have we got here? How do we handle him? Is he going to be okay? Is he going to suddenly lose it? And I got a bit closer to him and pushed my face closer to his, looked him straight in the eyes and said,
Don't mess me about. Where's the rest of the body? I said, where's the rest of the body?
And Nilsen said,
Okay, fair enough. It's in plastic bags in the wardrobe in the bedroom next door. I'll show you.
the strangest thing for us was the fact that as he spoke, so we believed him. As a detective, you tend to sort of take most of the things that you hear with a pinch of salt. But with Nilsen, right from the start, we believed what he was saying.
Jay will soon have proof that Nilsen's astonishing confession is true.
And I went into the bedroom, and the smell was quite intense, even with the windows open. And you could immediately smell that familiar smell of decomposing flesh. It was horrendous.
Is there anything else you want to tell me?
It's a long story. I'll tell you everything, but not here, at the police station.
So it was just a question of getting Nilsen up to the police station and then starting a murder inquiry.
The police's first task is to identify the victim and find out how they met their gruesome fate. But arresting officer Steve McCusker fears the bags could contain even more horrors.
We took him to the police car, and I sat in the back with him, and DCI Jay drove off. And there was something bothering me when I looked at the two sacks, and I thought, these are pretty large sacks, and if there is a dead person there, well, he was obviously a big man. And I just said to Nilsen, I said, how many bodies are we talking about here? Is it one or two? And he said,
Neither. It's 15 or 16, I think. It's a relief to be able to get it all off my chest.
And I remember Peter almost crashing the car. And it was the chilling way that he said it that we realized that this guy wasn't kidding. We had no handcuffs, no truncheons with us. and suddenly realized we were sitting with a killer. And as I had no handcuffs, I just grabbed his jacket to make sure that he wouldn't run out of the car now that we had him. And we proceeded like that back to the police station.
With Nilsen held at the police station, DCIJ and scene of crime officers return to Cranley Gardens. As each room is examined, Nilsen's flat begins to give up its horrific secrets.
We found the remains of 3 victims in the bags in his bedroom. And he had cut the bodies up into 5 parts. So you had the lower torso and the upper torso had been split, and the heads had been removed.
The dismembered remains are taken to Hornsey Mortuary, where the unenviable task of piecing the body parts together falls to forensic pathologist Professor David Bowen.
I was struck by the fact that the separation of the bones from the skeleton, the lower and the upper limbs, had been expertly done. The person responsible had developed some knowledge of the section of the body.
It is now a race against time to secure as much hard evidence as possible.
Must remind you, you're under court.
In the interviews that we did with Nilsen, we obviously tried to get as much information as we could about each of his victims. Bearing in mind, we had to charge this guy or let him go after 48 hours.
In your wardrobe, we found 2 black plastic bags. When the bags were opened, they were found to contain dismembered parts of human bodies. Would you like to tell me what happened?
In what context?
Incredibly, within just a few minutes of the interview starting, Nilsen manages to shock Jay with another chilling admission.
Have you searched the rest of the flat?
Why?
There's more in a tea chest. And under an inverted drawer in the bathroom. The total of which is the remains of 3 people.
Hidden under an upturned drawer in the bathroom, the police find the lower half of a man's body. Opening the tea chest in the living room, they uncover another torso with 2 partially dissected legs, a skull, and several bones. In all, the remains of 3 bodies.
One victim had only been dead for a few days. One had been dead for 9 months, and the other had been dead for 18 months. So there were awful problems with decomposition and smells and so on and so forth.
Brought the whole community together. All it took was her smile.
As today's fragments made their way to the forensic laboratory.
When news breaks of the gory discoveries, the press descend on North London.
And it'll be the end of the week before they get through their unpleasant task.
Nilsen's on-off boyfriend, Martin Hunter Craig, knows immediately who the reports are talking about.
I was staying in a hostel in Dean Street in London when the news broke that there had been a man arrested for murder in Cranley Gardens in northwest London. I instantly knew that it was something to do with Des. I'd been around to see him just 2 days before and something was very wrong. He wouldn't let me in the flat and he held the door open. And while he was talking to me, as if he said somebody was in there, but something smelled awful and he told me not to go in, in a very strict way. You don't go in, which I've just never seen him do before. There was something, when the news broke on the radio, I just knew.
To charge Nilsen formally with murder, Jay needs to confirm the name of at least one of the victims.
Who were they? The first one, I forget the name. The second one, never knew his name. The third, was Stephen Sinclair.
It's a major breakthrough in the case. But for Jay, just having Nilsen's word isn't enough. He has to find solid proof of the victim's identity.
We reached a stage where we were quite worried because the thought was always in our minds that if we charged Nilsen with the murder of John Smith, and John Smith turned up at the Old Bailey on the first day of the trial, we would lose credibility all the way through. So we had to be incredibly certain of what we had.
To give Jay the proof he requires, the forensic team focus their efforts on the body of Nilsen's latest victim.
We took from the bags carefully and laid each limb, each bone, out on the floor. So it was perhaps easier than one would have thought to jigsaw everything together.
It was a horrendous feeling, really, to look at these body parts, especially in the mortuary when they were reassembled, and try and think that, you know, these were human beings who were, not that long ago, walking around reasonably happily.
With the body reassembled, Bowen carefully lifts the fingerprints from one of the dismembered hands. By matching them to police records, Jay gets the confirmation he needs. Nilsen's last victim is indeed 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair. Dennis Nilsen is formally charged with murder. Jay can now begin to piece together the final movements of Nilsen's last victim.
Tell me about Stephen Sinclair.
We went back to my flat and started to drink. He started to nod off. I sat with headphones listening to music. I remember power, many different images. I knew that I must have killed him. The combination of drink and music drives me to tears. How about you? Stephen? It's okay. You carry on sleeping. Stephen, that didn't hurt at all. Nobody can touch you now.
Following Nilsen's arrest, the police find the strange homemade weapon he'd used to strangle Stephen Sinclair.
This was one of the devices that he used to strangle his last victim. It's a tie with a little piece of string attached to it. He said he murdered nearly all his victims using a tie. In fact, he made a quip at the end, saying, I used to have 15 ties and now all I've got is a clip on one. That was his sense of humour.
Next, Jay has to discover how Nilsen disposed of the body.
Can't remember anything else until I woke up the next morning. He was still in the armchair, and he was dead.
What did you do when you found Sinclair dead in the chair?
The following evening, I put a plastic sheet on the middle part of the front room. I took the body and laid it on the plastic sheet and got a long kitchen knife. There's a fair flow of blood, some of it overspilled onto the carpet. I cut the head off and got the pot out of the bathroom. I put the head in the pot, filled it with water.
Nilsen details how he'd boil the dismembered body parts to remove the flesh from the bones. Nilsen later goes on to recall how he set about systematically flushing the boiled remains down the toilet. The police continue to build their case against Nilsen. They turn their attention to the task of identifying his other victims. The trail of death and mutilation is about to get a lot longer. The quest to identify Dennis Nilsen's victims is only just beginning. The police have managed to name his last victim as Stephen Sinclair. The two other bodies discovered at Nilsen's North London flat still remain nameless. But Nilsen claims to have killed at least another dozen men.
It's 15 or 16, I think.
For Peter J., identifying the other victims has become a personal mission.
One of the things we felt very strongly, because I think 60% of us on the team were parents, we felt very strongly that we should take each investigation to the limit, because we felt a duty towards parents whose sons may have been victims of Nilsen. So we were under considerable pressure. We felt the pressure to take it as far as we could, so that we can actually be straight up with people at the end and say, your son was a victim or your son wasn't a victim.
To discover the fate of the other men killed by Nilsen, the police turn their attention to his previous address in Melrose Avenue.
We've been dealing with Cranley Gardens. I understand you told my officers that you previously lived at Willesden Green.
Yes. I occupied the rear ground floor flat with exclusive use of the garden.
And what will we find there?
Unless the site has been completely cleared by contractors, there should be evidence of the remains of at least 12 or 13 people.
Who is this man that's so keen to admit the killing of over a dozen men? Born in Fraserburgh, Scotland, to a Norwegian father and Scottish mother, Dennis Nilsen had a difficult childhood. Writer Brian Masters spent months interviewing Nilsen.
He had no real close contact with his family, except for one member of the family, and that was his grandfather, Andrew, who was a fisherman, and he would disappear at sea for weeks on end.
Masters suspects that the death of his beloved grandfather devastated Nilsen's childhood.
They took him into the kitchen, and on the kitchen table was a long box in which his grandfather was lying. And nobody had explained to him what that meant. And I think his idea of death and his idea of love fused at that moment.
Dennis Nilsen left home to join the army just short of his 16th birthday. Serving in the catering corps, it was here that Nilsen learnt the butchery skills that he was later to use to dissect the bodies of his victims. After 11 years' service, Nilsen joined the Metropolitan Police. But after only 11 months, he left the force, claiming his increasingly promiscuous homosexual lifestyle was the reason for his departure. Ex-boyfriend Martin Hunter Craig recalls his time with Nilsen with mixed feelings.
I found Des very easy to get on with when he hadn't been drinking. He was quite sensible and friendly kind of guy, like a bit like an older brother. But whenever he did drink, he would be completely, I don't know what the word is, but sometimes obnoxious. He was just downright crude, and I didn't like it at all.
Nilsen's last job before his arrest was an executive officer at a job centre in North London. To try and work out how a seemingly respectable civil servant transformed into one of the most prolific serial killers in British history, Peter Jay asks Nilsen about the first time he killed. Nilsen recalls how it all started one New Year's Eve in 1978. After a heavy drinking session, Nilsen returns to his flat with a young man. Nilsen would later tell writer Brian Masters that it was when he woke up that he made the decision that would shape the rest of his life.
Nilsen says it was amazing, the strength that he found he had when the decision had been made. And the decision, he said, was made somewhere inside him. He felt it taking over.
Although Nilsen is able to recall how he'd killed his first nameless victim, to Jay's frustration, Nilsen could never say why he killed.
We looked at everything you can possibly think of to try and find out why this was happening, because we were frustrated. You always had a motive in a murder, always, but not with this one.
After questioning Nilsen for many weeks, Brian Masters believes he's uncovered the reason why Nilsen was driven to kill.
Once it had happened, he felt tremendous solace, and I think he used the word, which is shocking, benevolence. Because he then treated what was now a corpse as a thing of beauty. He took care of it. He made it feel comfortable in his warped mind. He sat in a chair in front of the television. He'd come home from work and find the body still sitting there, and he'd have a chat with it. Guess what happened to me today? So this was a surrogate companion for him. He liked death to be in proximity. He liked the company of corpses.
Nilsen admits to hiding his twisted secret from visitors under the floorboards.
I believe now that there was a couple of people on the floorboards, but people have said to me that you've lived with this guy on and off for so long, and yet why didn't you luck here or luck there? Well, I had. I put my clothes in the wardrobe. There was no bags in the wardrobe. This was at a certain time when obviously people weren't there that this was happening, and once he found a space for them under the floorboards or in the garden or down the sewer or whatever, then he would dispose of the body.
Nilsen shares his flat with the body of his first victim for over 6 months without ever knowing his name. Jay then asks Nilsen about his second victim. This time Nilsen can remember the name. It's a name that's all too familiar to Peter Jay.
The second one was Ken Ockenden.
A lad by the name of Kenneth Ockenden had gone missing. He was a tourist, respectable background, and he just disappeared off the face of the earth. We're just utterly amazed that here suddenly now, 5 years on, we've got the fellow who murdered Kenneth Ockenden that they spent so much time trying to find.
A fingertip search of Nilsen's flat in Melrose Avenue reveals nothing to substantiate Nilsen's claim that his second victim was indeed Kenneth Ockenden. Against all the odds, it's in the flat in Cranley Gardens that the forensic team get the break they've been looking for.
When Nilsen moved from Melrose Avenue, he obviously took everything he had with him. And one of the items that he took was a London A to Z.
With incredible thoroughness, each page of the A to Z is checked for fingerprints. To reveal fingerprints on paper, forensic examiners use a chemical called ninhydrin. If any fingerprints are present, the ninhydrin will react with the chemicals found in human sweat, and the prints will appear as a dark reddish colour called Rumen's purple. On the corner of the London street map, they find a partial thumbprint. Incredibly, it matches those of the missing 23-year-old Kenneth Ockenden. After almost 5 years of searching, the police can finally close the case on the Canadian student. With only 2 out of the 15 victims identified, Jay pushes Nilsen to recall everything he can about the other murders.
Can you think of anything which is going to help us identify who this man is?
He was Irish.
How about victim number 9?
I think he had a Scottish accent.
Victim number 10?
I think I must have met him in the West End.
After 30 hours of intense questioning, 3 more names are confirmed. Martin Duffy, a 16-year-old homeless boy from Birkenhead. Billy Sutherland, a 26-year-old male prostitute from Leith, Scotland. And 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow, the last man Nilsen killed in Melrose Avenue. But how did Nilsen manage to kill so many without anybody noticing?
The people that he murdered, they had no real connections with anyone in London. They were from outside London. They'd come to London to seek their fortune, if you like. Some of them were living rough. They were people that the fact that they'd gone missing wouldn't have been noticeable.
Charting each murder, Jay comes to a terrifying conclusion. In one 18-month period, Nilsen killed a staggering 10 times, averaging 1 murder every 7 weeks. The forensic team begin an intensive search of the flat in Melrose Avenue. Methodically, they start to pull up every floorboard in the ground floor. Incredibly, even though it's been nearly 2 years since Nilsen lived there, they find vital microscopic evidence.
We were able to find pupae cases from various flies that come at various stages of decomposition of a body.
Peter Jay now needs to find out how Nilsen extracted the bodies from beneath the floorboards and disposed of them without alerting his neighbours.
I pulled up the floorboards and put each bundle in pieces of carpeting and tied them again. I decided to dispose of all these remains by burning.
When the fire burnt down, did you do anything else?
I pummeled it down to make sure no big bits were left behind.
But further fragments were recovered in today's sifting, which the police believe are human remains.
After 3 weeks of scouring Nilsen's garden in Melrose Avenue, the team extract over 2,000 bone fragments.
These are bone fragments that came from the garden. This is the sort of thing that we found, little scraps of bone which had been through intense heat.
Despite all their efforts, the bones proved too badly burnt and crushed to identify any further victims. The forensic search of Melrose Avenue is brought to a close. Then the police are handed an unexpected breakthrough. In the course of a separate investigation, the police identify a man who survived a Nilsen attack. 21-year-old Carl Stotter. Interviewed in 1983, Stotter recalls the night Nilsen tried to kill him.
I fell asleep and I woke up and he was strangling me.
Over 25 years later, Carl is still traumatized by the memory of that night.
And I remember this guy lying over my back and he strangled me. And the pressure in my head was unbelievable. Being strangled is not nice.
But Nilsen isn't finished with Carl.
He picked me up out of the bed and he put me in a bath. And he tried to drown me.
Incredibly, Carl survives the ordeal. For 3 days he lies unconscious in Nilsen's flat before coming round. Yet rather than finishing Carl off, for some inexplicable reason, Nilsen does everything he can to revive him. It's an uncharacteristic act that still mystifies Carl.
He knew I was alive because he brought me back to life. This is what most people don't realise, is that is he my killer or is he my saviour? And this is what I battle with. Did he kill me or did he save me?
Carl's testimony provides police with an insight into the troubled mind of Dennis Nilsen. It also gives the police a key witness for the upcoming trial.
Come on. Are you all right? We are labeling.
For 5 years, Dennis Nilsen waged a campaign of murder that went completely undetected by the police. Following his arrest, Nilsen readily confesses to the strangulation, dismemberment and disposal of 15 men. After 6 months, the police investigation has turned up the names of just 5 of his 15 victims. With the inquiry into the murders at Melrose Avenue exhausted, the efforts now focus on the anonymous bodies found in Cranley Gardens. Nilsen is vague, but he thinks one of the men he killed was called John, and that he'd served in the Guards.
He said he was from High Wycombe. We sat and drank.
In order to try and get to the bottom of that one, we sent a team off to look through all the Guards' records to try and find a John who came from High Wycombe. And the ones that were found were traced, still alive. And it took 3 or 4 months to realise that he never was a Guardsman.
The search now turns to the West End of London, where Nilsen picked up many of his victims. Trawling through police records, a list of 40 men named John from High Wycombe is drawn up. It's now up to the forensic team to whittle the list down to 1. By analysing strips of muscle attached to the dismembered bones, the forensic team deduce the victim's blood group. Comparing the information with the police records, they're able to confirm the name of Nilsen's 13th victim as John Howlett. The news came as a terrible blow to Carl Stotter.
My mum used to work with his dad, and he was dead in the wardrobe when Nilsen was trying to kill me. John was just chopped up. He did not deserve to die that way, nor did anyone. How can you imagine that somebody would chop me up into little pieces?
The police can now put 6 names to Nilsen's 15 victims. With a full confession and strong forensic evidence, they now have everything they need to go to court. But there is still one last question Jay wants answered.
Dennis, did you intend to kill all these people?
What I did seemed right at the time.
Are you saying you had a need to kill?
In some cases, at that precise moment of the act, I felt my sole reason for existence was to carry out that act. What I did had to be done.
Nilsen's lack of regret still troubles Peter J.
He never ever showed any remorse. You would never see him sit there in an interview thinking or saying, you know, I feel really bad about that, or there was nothing. It was just, he was stone cold.
The trial of Dennis Nilsen is set to start on the 24th of October, 1983. Just a few days before the case is heard, the police finally put a name to the third and last victim from Cranley Gardens, a 28-year-old Graham Allen. But the judge rules the evidence has come too late to use in the case against Nilsen. As the names of Kenneth Ockenden, Malcolm Barlow, Martin Duffy, John Howlett, Billy Sutherland, and Stephen Sinclair are read out, Nilsen is asked how he pleads to the charge of murder. To this day, Peter J. can't believe Nilsen's reply.
Whether it was on legal advice or his own choosing, he decided to plead not guilty to murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He admits to all the killings, but he wouldn't admit that he killed them with malice aforethought.
Nilsen is hoping to get away with the lesser charge of manslaughter. The trial is to last just over 2 weeks. For Carl Stotter, the memory of facing his attacker in court is a painful experience.
It was a nightmare. It was something I didn't know. I remember thinking, I don't even know this guy. Why would a total stranger want to try and kill you? It just didn't compute. And so I never understood it.
On Friday the 4th of November, the jury give their verdict. Dennis Nilsen is found guilty of the murder of all 6 men. The judge hands Nilsen a life sentence, recommending he serve no less than 25 years. Nilsen's lack of reaction to his sentence baffles those closest to him.
He'd been found guilty and sentenced, I think, to 25 years, but he didn't bat an eyelid. Very strange.
Nilsen was to make one last chilling confession to Peter J.
Nilsen said, if you hadn't caught me now, it wouldn't have been 15 murders. It would have probably been 150 if I'd been caught later on. He said there was no stopping me. I couldn't help myself. He used to say that when he woke up in the morning, he'd look and find another body there and think, oh no, I've done it again.
3 decades after Nilsen first killed, there is to be one last twist to the case. At the time of the investigation, the police couldn't confirm the identity of Nilsen's first victim. But recently, thanks to a team dedicated to solving cold cases, the name that had eluded investigators for so long was finally substantiated. Nilsen's first victim is named as Stephen Dean Holmes. He was only 14 years old. In 2006, after a judicial review, Dennis Nilsen was informed officially that he would never be considered for parole and would spend the rest of his life behind bars.